Tim Burton is known as the pioneer of Gothic horror films. With classics like Corpse Bride, Edward Scissorhands, and the Halloween-Christmas hybrid, The Nightmare Before Christmas, under his belt, he has solidified his spot as one of the kings of Halloween. Unfortunately, through the years, we've seen his legacy falter with flops like Dumbo and Dark Shadows. And if I'm being honest, Tim Burton hasn't made anything good in years. But why is that? Has he lost his touch? Or is the brilliance of his most acclaimed work to the credit of someone else? What's good, guys? It's Alissa. If you're new here, hello. First things first, let me get this out of the way. I was demonetized for the past 3 months. I was not making any money from the videos on my channel, but sometime last week my channel was remonetized and I am so excited. But in that time, I have been everywhere else but this main channel. So I just want to let you guys know that you can find me on TikTok, Instagram. I've been on Threads lately for some reason, and make sure you subscribe to my second channel. We're also doing family game night live streams every Friday on this channel, so make sure that you join, and also make sure that you like this video if you're enjoying this so far, and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Now that I got that out the way, let's get into it. Tim Burton is from the suburbs of Burbank, California. Later in life, he attended the California Institute of the Arts in Santa Clarita, California. In the early 80s, Burton was offered an apprenticeship at Walt Disney Animation Studios in Burbank, which is where he got his start in the film industry. Burton and Disney have an estranged relationship. He even described the environment at Disney Studios as soul-destroying. His time there was spent as an animator and storyboard artist. Burton said to The Times that, "You're strapped to a table all day and you have to draw. I just flipped out." And crazy story, allegedly, in his frustration with the studio, he decided to show up to the studio with a bleeding mouth pretending to be a vampire after getting his wisdom tooth pulled. During his time at Disney Studios, he worked on films like The Fox and the Hound, Tron, and The Black Cauldron uncredited. He received criticisms from his employer for not being able to replicate the classic Disney animation style. Burton is also a self-proclaimed weirdo. He often reflects on his childhood and not fitting in. Growing up in suburbia was like growing up in a place where there's no sense of history, no sense of culture, no sense of passion for anything. You never felt that there was any attachment to things, so you were either forced to conform and cut out a large portion of your personality, or to develop a very strong interior life which made you feel separate. In an interview for his film Frankenweenie, Burton says, "I felt very weird, isolated, and lonely, but at the same time I didn't feel that way as a person. I didn't feel like a weirdo." So you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place. You're treated one way, and yet you don't feel that way at all. And looking into his early work, I do believe this to be true. His art seems to lean into the off-kilter parts of his creativity. He took a lot of risks with his films, really hammering down on the dark, horrific imagery. And I can imagine, growing up, this was probably criticized by his peers, especially at a time where this style was not popular. But you'd think he'd grown out of that thinking, this not like other people mindset, as a 66-year-old millionaire who constantly has his work be funded with big budgets, but no. Burton clings to this outcast persona to this day. Burton spoke with BBC in light of his most recent movie, Beetlejuice, about being a technophobe, which, by the way, means to be a person who fears, dislikes, or avoids new technology, but for the past decade has almost completely adapted to CGI over the usual use of practical effects in his early films. But we'll get into that later. Anyway, reflecting on his use of the internet, Burton said, "I get depressed very quickly, maybe more quickly than other people, but it doesn't take me much to start to click and start to short circuit." Burton made his name by pioneering an era of Gothic horror in film, his most notable movies being Halloween classics like Corpse Bride, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and Edward Scissorhands. Burton has stated that this is his most personal and meaningful film because it is a representation of him not being able to communicate effectively with others as a teenager. My personal favorite popular Tim Burton movie is actually Beetlejuice, which just got a sequel this past September. When you ask people what their favorite Tim Burton movie is, the stop-motion classic Coraline often gets mentioned. And Tim Burton is not new to stop-motion animation, and has gone on to make many other classic successful stop-motion films. But Coraline is actually from the mind of fellow Gothic horror filmmaker Selick. Coraline is based on a novel of the same name written by Neil Gaiman. Selick adapted the screenplay and directed the stop-motion film adaptation of this book. And this confusion with Selick's work and Tim Burton's work is not new. My theory is the domino effect of their first and biggest collaboration, that is 1993's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Tim Burton is often the sole credit for the making of that film because his name is the one at the top of the billing. But Burton actually entrusted the direction of the movie to Henry Selick. Selick and Burton became friends while enrolled in CalArts animation program, and later found themselves working together at Walt Disney Animation Studios in the early 80s. "We bonded because we weren't the typical Disney people," says Selick. "We couldn't draw their characters perfectly." Ironically, these two went on to make one of Disney's biggest cult classics. And also, ironically, the movie wasn't even originally a Disney movie. Disney initially released the film through the Touchstone Pictures label because the studio believed the film would be too dark and scary for kids. The Nightmare Before Christmas was released under the adult-skewing Touchstone banner with a PG rating, rare for an animated feature at the time, and the hopes and prayers that the film wouldn't terrify a legion of children, or more importantly, their parents who were buying the tickets. But I'm sure this scene horrified plenty. Disney went from criticizing Selick and Burton's animation style to employing them. "But your work is still not our style, so we're gonna platform you on our adult production company." But wait, this movie was actually very well received. Actually, y'all, this is a Disney movie. And you know what else? Here's a Disneyland attraction. Anyway, The Nightmare Before Christmas is technically from the mind of Tim Burton. Based on a poem and the early drawings created by Burton while working at Disney, The Nightmare Before Christmas became the first feature-length stop-motion animated film. After being considered to be developed as a short film or 30-minute holiday special, The Nightmare Before Christmas would technically be Tim Burton's first full-length stop-motion film. But really, Tim Burton would actually direct his first full-length stop-motion movie over a decade later with Corpse Bride in 2005. And even then, he had a co-director, Mike Johnson, so technically his first time solely directing a full-length stop-motion film was 2012's Frankenweenie. Burton appointed Henry Selick as the director for Nightmare to put his focus on directing Batman Returns and the pre-production of his film Ed Wood. In an interview for the 30th anniversary of Nightmare Before Christmas, Selick said, "Tim's a genius for the ideas, the designs, and all the things that really do matter. But he wanted somebody else to direct it. I'd done some hand-drawn animation, and later I've done some computer animation. But I just love stop motion. I love moving those puppets around." Burton and Selick have very similar styles, so this collaboration was kind of a no-brainer. They even went on to collaborate again in 1996 for the stop-motion Disney film James and the Giant Peach. I'm a firm believer that where there's smoke, there's fire. How easy is it for people to have their name at the top of the billing, but have a minimal hand in the making of the film? And more importantly, is this something that Tim Burton does all the time? In the 2010s, Burton had a bit of a flop era. His last good movie, in my opinion, being Alice in Wonderland. We had a movie night in elementary school where we saw this in the auditorium, and I just thought that movie was the best thing I ever seen. Now, granted, I have not seen it recently to see if it still holds up, so y'all let me know. Alice in Wonderland is Burton's highest grossing film to this day, being the only one of his movies to be in the billion, not million, billion-dollar box office club. But his crown began to slip with the release of the 2012 gothic dark fantasy film Dark Shadows. Receiving mixed reviews and performing poorly in North America, we began to see that it is possible for Tim Burton to miss. I reached out to you all in my community tab to ask your opinion on Tim Burton. I asked, have you enjoyed Tim Burton's movies recently? What do Tim Burton movies mean to you? Do you think Tim Burton is the king of spooky season? And who do you think is the real supreme of spooky season? And if you missed the conversation, feel free to comment down below with your thoughts on any of those questions. One response stated, I honestly haven't enjoyed much of his films. I think I grew out of them. I tried watching some of his recent films, not the Beetlejuice remake, and I don't know how to explain it. I feel like he's stuck in the early 2000s decade. Or maybe I just don't enjoy his style anymore. I think Hot Topic and Tumblr ruined him for me. And I never really saw him as the king of spooky season because growing up watching Halloween, Jason, Freddy Krueger, and Night of the Living Dead, I think nostalgia for Halloween also ruined having new films replace those films for me. Another one added, to be honest, I didn't even know he was still creating stuff. I feel he was overhyped in the 2000s and even towards the mid-2010s. Like, he was everywhere in the media. I've seen Nightmare Before Christmas maybe like 2 times in total in my life, but I'm so sick of it because of how oversaturated it is. I feel like I've seen it a billion times over. Though when he does his hand at whimsy, I really like it. Edward Scissorhands, Big Fish, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, for example. Big Fish in particular is quite a whimsical movie and has me crying every time I watch it. I definitely recommend anyone to watch Big Fish. I think at one point Tim Burton was seen as the king of spook, but he hasn't done anything in recent years to be deserving of that title in my opinion. I feel like Burton thrives when he leans into the darker side of his creativity more than the campy comedy side. The only time this combination really worked was with Beetlejuice, in my opinion. And don't get me wrong, I love Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as much as the next person, but I understand where die-hard fans may have been turned off by the ridiculousness of that film. He seems to try and play both sides with this. In 2005, just months after the summertime release of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Burton would then release the stop-motion gothic horror Corpse Bride. These movies couldn't be more opposite. But does this actually show Burton's versatility, or does it show that Burton isn't actually manning the helm as much as we think he is? We go on to see this same pattern in 2012, with Dark Shadows being released in May of that year, then the stop-motion film Frankenweenie being released that September. Frankenweenie is a full-length stop-motion remake of Burton's 1984 live-action Disney short film of the same name. Burton has said, "The film is based on a memory that I had when I was growing up, and with my relationship with a dog that I had." Frankenweenie was meant to accompany the theatrical re-releases of The Jungle Book and Pinocchio, but after reviewing the film, the execs deemed that it was far too scary for the children that would be filling the theaters. The film was shelved, placed into the Disney vault, and Burton was accused of wasting money on a kids film too scary to actually be seen by kids. Tim Burton was fired from Disney after completing the film, stating that it was a "thank you very much, but you go your way and we'll go our way" kind of thing. Given that Frankenweenie was completed just after the disastrous 1984 screening of The Black Cauldron, it's no surprise that Disney would want to distance themselves from yet another film that was too scary. Stop-motion films take much longer to make than live-action movies, and it seems that at this point in Burton's career, he started taking a different approach to his work. Fans would see this shift with the 1999 release of Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow was also a turning point for Burton. Along with the change in his personal life, Burton changed radically in style for his next project, leaving the haunted forest and colorful outcasts behind to go on to direct Planet of the Apes. Production for Corpse Bride began in 2003 and was officially released 2 years later in 2005, with production for Frankenweenie starting after this in 2005, only to be released way in 2012. With the start of production for these films taking place during Burton's peak, I believe that they were able to still capture the remnants of his glory. But with the release dates being years later in his career, I think that created the illusion that Tim Burton still had that same greatness within him, because it just doesn't make sense. How do you go from whimsical comedy Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to stop-motion classic Corpse Bride in the same year? And again, whatever the hell Dark Shadows was, to the charming children's tale that's Frankenweenie. Tim Burton hasn't actually written most of the movies that he's worked on. He's a director. And I know you're probably like, duh, Catherine Obvious.
What? I said thank you, Catherine Obvious.
But I genuinely feel as though the confusion of who made Nightmare Before Christmas has created a domino effect of him being given way more credit for what he actually does than what he actually deserves. He is credited as a writer for only 3 of his movies post his Walt Disney apprenticeship: Nightmare Before Christmas, Edward Scissorhands, and Frankenweenie, with uncredited work for Mars Attacks and credit for the characters in Corpse Bride. In his early days, he seemed more hungry. He wrote scripts, animated, and created complex characters. These days, Tim Burton's name is used in promo to draw people to these films that are fans of him and his style of work. But this just makes you believe that he has a Tyler Perry type hand in these works. These days, he's a glorified producer. And that's not to say he hasn't made a huge contribution to film, but I think the lines are often crossed as to what his job actually is. And sometimes he has a hand in creating that narrative. In press tours, he's asked about these movies. He gives the same spiel about how he relates to the main characters because he was understood like them and blah, 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 blah. Same statements, different fonts. But if you're just a director with no writing credits, how is this where the inspiration for the script is drawn from? You're just just given the screenplay and the responsibility to bring those words to life.
You would think Burton, who frequently discusses feeling misunderstood and unable to communicate as a child, would relate to this. But in a press conference for the film, he explains, "It was always a girl wandering around from one crazy character to another, and I never really felt any real emotional connection. Like, that's the whole point." And this really underscores the disparity between Alice and a movie like Edward Scissorhands. Why would you choose to direct something you have no emotional connection to?
I found this observation of Tim Burton by Tim Adams of The Guardian to be interesting. But particularly when Burton is asked to explain the genesis of some of his ideas, or worse, relate them to events of his past or present, he does his best, in good faith, but makes it clear he'd much sooner let his films tell his story. Maybe he does have a sketchy memory when it comes to remembering the inspiration for his films. Or maybe he's just using this excuse as a scapegoat to hide the fact that he probably hasn't made anything original in years. Or that secret third thing.
Money!
This isn't me trying to discredit the work and the significance of a director when making a film. Tim Burton usually carries a producer credit alongside his director credit, but rarely a writing credit. I think he fights to have the producer responsibility alongside the direction because in his early days, he grew sick of Disney or Warner Brothers sticking their hand in the creative direction of his films. In the 90s, Burton directed 2 Batman films, which I've never seen, but was not asked to come back for the third and final movie of that trilogy. Burton and Warner Bros. Mutually agreed to part ways. To attract the younger audience, it was decided that 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙨𝙘𝙧, sorry if I got that wrong, would direct the third film, whilst Burton would only produce it in conjunction with Peter McGregor Scott, in which Burton was given top billing producer credit without being able to contribute ideas, only approving director and screenplayers. First of all, what is a film producer?
It could be a wide range of things, to like securing talent, funding, putting their own money in, scripts, hiring directors, locations. They could do almost everything. They're probably can be one of the most important parts of a movie.
Yeah.
Or they could do practically nothing.
Or nothing.
Yeah, nothing. There's literally, you can get a producing credit if, let's say, you just happen to introduce the right person to another right person. Maybe you introduce the guy who wrote the script to the director, and then it gets made, and you get a producer's credit.
A tale as old as time, production companies disliking the dark direction Burton takes these films they're giving him money to make. If I'm going to do something, just let me do my thing and hope for the best. If you don't want me to do it, then don't have me do it. But if I do it, then don't make me conform. If you want it to be a James Cameron movie, then get James Cameron to do it. While the director of the film has massive control over the direction of the film, being the producer can give you more creative control over casting, locations, and other crucial parts of the film.
Part of the job of the producer is to put together a group of people that interact with synergy, that are moving together to create this behemoth piece of entertainment, the movie.
I want to highlight the control over casting here. Burton is no stranger to having recurring collaborators take part in his work, most notably those being Johnny Depp, the godfather of his 2 children, and Helena Bonham Carter, his ex-partner of 13 years and the mother of his 2 children. And this is just me being messy, but Tim Burton actually met Helena Bonham Carter on the set of his 2001 Planet of the Apes film. That same year, he left his then fiancée Lisa Marie for Helena Bonham Carter, who were both actresses in that same film. He also frequently collaborates with composer and friend Danny Elfman. Again, me being messy, but Elfman and Burton had a falling out sometime in 1994 for reasons neither have disclosed. The Nightmare Before Christmas was just so much work. It was spread out over almost 2 years, and in the middle was Batman Returns. So there was a lot of room for personality clashes and emotions. In the end, it was over something really stupid, like most things. I felt like I lost a brother. The 2 later reconciled over coffee in 1996. And since 1992, film editor Chris Lebenson has been the editor of every Tim Burton film except Big Eyes in 2014 and Beetlejuice in 2024. I think the formulaic repetition of his casting is a huge attribution to the fan fatigue of his recent work. It's like the production process consists of Burton getting handed a budget, then immediately speed dialing the same cast and crew to come work on it. To his credit, Burton has directed every movie in his filmography except one, The Nightmare Before Christmas. Director of the film Henry Selick recalled, It's as though Burton laid the egg, and I sat on it and hatched it. He wasn't involved in a hands-on way, but his hand is in it. It was my job to make it look like a Tim Burton film, which is not so different from my own films. I don't want to take away from Tim, but he was not in San Francisco when we made it. He came up 5 times over 2 years and spent no more than 8 or 10 days in total. And I believe this was not said in shade because, again, Henry Selick is never really mentioned when talking about Nightmare. Like I said earlier, in 1996, Burton and Selick collaborated again for James and the Giant Peach, with Selick being the director again and Burton being one of the producers. But they couldn't even bother to even mention Henry Selick as the director in their own promo.
What do we do? Walt Disney Pictures and the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas invite you to go over the edge.
And again, name dropping Tim Burton.
From Tim Burton, the producer of Alice in Wonderland and The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Roald Dahl's James and the Giant Peach.
Like, come on. Roald Dahl's estate didn't even own the rights to this book anymore. In the promo of their own trailers, it clearly says a Henry Selick film. Like, how hard is it to just say his name? A film by credit is usually used for the directors, although that credit alone has stirred its own controversy with filmmakers believing it's pretentious because films are a collaborative effort, which is valid. A single film by credit has decades of people believing that Tim Burton is the director of a certain movie about a resurrected Pumpkin King.
I think what happens a lot of the time is that when creators of a cartoon are in interviews, in press, doing appearances on podcasts and like hosting the Oscars and shit, they understandably become what you think of when you think of that cartoon. And because of that, I think that general audiences tend to attribute everything about that show or that character or that world to that one person. In reality, neither one of these men are solely responsible for the success of these shows. One is more responsible than the other, definitely, but I think that it is very important to know that neither of these men have touched any of these shows in over 10 years.
Of course, the bigger names when promoting these movies are Walt Disney and Tim Burton, and their ultimate goal is to make money. But that's just disrespectful and, dare I say, unethical. Which brings me to another glaring issue. On one fall day in 2016, Tim Burton was put on the Jumbotron after interviewing with Bustle's Rachel Simon. Rachel asked Burton why the few characters in his movie version of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children are predominantly white, to which Tim Burton responds, "Nowadays people are talking about it more," he says regarding film diversity. Things either call for things or they don't. I remember back when I was a child watching the Brady Bunch and they started getting all politically correct. Okay. Like, okay, let's have an Asian child and a black. I used to get more offended by that than just, I grew up watching blaxploitation movies, right? And I said, that's great. I didn't go like, okay, there should be more white people in these movies. Since this interview, Burton has released only 2 movies, Dumbo in 2019 and Beetlejuice in 2024, with the Netflix series Wednesday premiering in 2022. And just to clarify, Jenna Ortega is one of Tim Burton's first leads of color. During production, the creative team sought out a Latina actress to play Wednesday Addams to stick to the heritage of her patriarch Gomez Addams. I have not personally seen Netflix's Wednesday, but after its release, it was criticized for having the only black characters in the show be the antagonist, a repeat of the issue in Miss Peregrine that sparked this conversation in the first place. In the 2016 movie, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, based on the book of the same name, Burton cast his first main character of color in his 35-year film career. Samuel L. Jackson plays Baron, a soulless eyeball-eating villain who haunts and is eventually defeated by the lily white main characters. And no one is saying that black people can't be cast as villains in these stories, but out of an entire filmography, your only black characters have been villains? I'm raising eyebrows. Black people don't fit your aesthetic, but when they do, they're the antagonist? Let's unpack that, Tim. Burton's comments in that Bustle interview seem to resurface every time he puts out a new project, and he has not been able to bounce back with his fans of color or non-POCism ever since.
I said I stopped giving Tim Burton attention a while ago when he said black people don't fit his aesthetic and he never apologized. I don't care about the new Beetlejuice movie. Anything he makes is not worth my time. So me making that comment, there were Tim Burton fans that weren't happy with what I had said because they felt as though I was attacking them when I wasn't. Because I also said right under it, I said, am I saying that you shouldn't support Tim Burton? No, because I don't tell people what to do. Do what you want, because I'm going to do what I want and I watch his movies or that little Wednesday show.
But Burton claims to be re-energized during his press tour for Beetlejuice. The third one has to be called Beetlejuice, by the way. Burton said, I realized that the only way for me to be a success is that I have loved doing it. I got a little bit lost along the way, but now with this one, I feel like it didn't matter how it turned out. I just enjoyed and loved making it with all those people. My opinion is that this high is only because he's back in the public's good graces after the success of Wednesday, but I digress. Outside of the lack of diversity, Burton's recent work has been criticized for just being stale and uninspired. I mean, how inspired can you be when you're still pulling your inspiration from the same lens you had on the world when the Brady Bunch was still airing new episodes? I think that this writer by the name of 𝙈𝙤𝙪𝙘𝙧 summed it up perfectly. Creative geniuses explore new avenues of looking at life, unearthing untold perspectives to frame classic messages. While tales of undead corpses, murderous demons, and sinister skeletons abound in his works, for Tim Burton, the person of color story is still one too deviant to direct. Tim Burton is historically championed for his eccentric style in his films. His early works like Beetlejuice, his Batman films, and even Pee-wee's Big Adventure capture this very well. Dark, but also bright in places that make it very fun. But to reference a point that was made earlier, films are a collaborative effort. There is a team of people, a whole cast and crew that scrolls past the last 10 minutes of these films that go unnoticed to the general public. And crazy enough, the major awards on Tim Burton's films haven't even been for his directing. Beetlejuice won an Academy Award for Best Makeup, with the award going to Vanille, Steve Laporte, and Robert Short. Ed Wood also won an Academy Award for Best Makeup, being awarded to Rick Baker, Vanille again, and Yolanda Toussaint. Alice in Wonderland won 2 Academy Awards for Best Art Direction and Best Costume Design. Art Direction going to Robert Stromberg and Karen O'Hara, and Best Costume to Colleen Atwood. Wednesday even won 4 Emmys, some being Outstanding Contemporary Costumes for a Series going to Colleen Atwood again, Mark Sutherland, Bobby Sotar, Claudia Littlefield, and Adina Bukur, and Outstanding Original Main Title Theme Music going to Danny Elfman. Burton himself has only been nominated for an Academy Award once, and that was for Frankenweenie in 2013. This is a common practice in the music industry too. Singers may not be the best at writing or producing music, but with the right team of people, they can deliver you a masterpiece. My assumption is that the cast and crew of these films just do what Henry Selick did all those years ago on Nightmare Before Christmas, which is make it look like a Tim Burton film. That can be left up to the interpretation of, say, whoever is on the VFX team that day, which could also explain the inconsistency of his filmography post Big Fish. Tim Burton is on record saying that he doesn't want to franchise Nightmare Before Christmas or Beetlejuice. We know how the latter went. And with the success of both Wednesday and the hype around the new Beetlejuice sequel, we can guess what path Tim Burton is on. And Jenna Ortega? Girl, you just signed an MCU link deal with Tim Burton. And Burton just got his M. Night Shyamalan comeback. If you noticed, I haven't given my thoughts on Beetlejuice, and that's because once I watch it, that solidifies that it exists. I'm gonna stay stuck in 1989 with the original. But if I were to have quick thoughts, I would say that based on the trailer, it looks kind of like a Netflix series to me. Derogatory. And I think with the pre-production officially starting after Wednesday, even though this has been in talks for years, this just makes me feel like this was an easy cash grab. I might do a review on it if I decide to watch it, we'll see. But from the trailer, I just wasn't feeling the makeup and the effects. And I'm gonna chalk that up to HD cameras. We just can see too much these days. And you know, maybe Burton doesn't have anything important to say anymore. Like when he wrote Edward Scissorhands, he isn't that misunderstood kid who was dropped from Disney that has something to prove anymore. Hopefully Tim Burton can look past his bigotry and actually make something fresh.
It's not a case of Tim Burton getting worse, it's that others are getting better. There are so many shows/movies that have come out in the last 20 years with a similar style and done so well.
There are infinite stories to be told, stories that can easily be told from the lens of a person of color. Henry Selick did this in 2022 with Wendell and Wild. which he directed and co-wrote with Jordan Peele. The protagonist Kat and her family were black characters, but her race was never the focal point. It just was. They even had a social commentary on the prison industrial complex and how the government turns prisons over to private corporations to run for profit. Shaky final product aside, because I do have my gripes about that movie, but if you want to hear more about that, Ella Pastoral has a great video on her channel, so I'll link it down below for you guys to go check out. But this video is not about Wendell and Wild. Kat was an outcast, like many of the stories that Burton likes to tell. You can tell that story with any character of any shade. That is not exclusive to white people, as Burton's work might have us to believe. But if he doesn't know how to tell other people's stories, nobody is asking him to. Well, at least I'm not. Because if you are going to tell other people's stories, you do have the responsibility to tell it right. And most importantly, you have the responsibility to tell it with care. But anyway, what do you guys think? Is Tim Burton making a comeback? Have you watched any Tim Burton movies since his comments on race? I'm personally not pressed to watch anything new from Tim Burton, and I'm not necessarily a huge Tim Burton fan, but I do have my unintentional favorites. And if I seemed like I was caping for Henry Selick, I was. I love his work to death until he has his damning interview when somebody asks him about race, okay? Until then, catch me at the box office when they release Coraline in the theater for the 5th time this year with, you know, exclusive behind the scenes footage that we've seen a million times. But anyway, happy Halloween, you guys. I am recording this on the morning of Halloween, and if you would like to keep up with me outside of YouTube, you can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. All that information is in the description box down below, and make sure you join us every Friday for family game night. If you made it to the end, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up, make sure you subscribe to my channel, and make sure you hit the notification bell to stay up to date with posts and uploads from me. But for now, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Happy holidays, happy Scorpio season. And I will see you guys in my next video. Peace.